Hi everybody. My name is Drew Callen, and I'm co-founder and CEO here at Greenhouse with Victor. Victor's our COO and our first employee. Funnily enough, he's sitting here in Bali. I am in Singapore, and we're very happy to be spending time with you here today. So, quick shout out to all of you for taking the time to listen in and give us the space and time to connect with you. I'm sorry we can't do this in a more intimate setting, but this is the reality of 2021. I'd also like to thank Spark Labs, a partner of ours who we're working increasingly close with through the year and giving us access to all of you to share a bit about our own experiences as it relates towards expanding internationally and sharing a bit about our expertise given what we do. So we are greenhouse.co. Greenhouse is a professional services marketplace that's really put in place to help companies scale more efficiently across Greater Asia. Our ambition is to accelerate globalization for the greater good, and we do that by using technology to replace some of the very tedious analog activity as it relates to expanding your startup. For example, if you wanted to enter Southeast Asia from South Korea, where I understand you all are, that process can be very cumbersome, right? You've got to tap into your personal network, go to Google, try to find some service providers that can give you an idea of the regulatory requirements, make sure that you're following the right rules and regulations. Then you've got to qualify all these providers, negotiate prices, and then manage all of those relationships. That's a very broken experience. And we are using technology to simplify that entire process to make it safe, secure, and quick. So that's a bit about Greenhouse. Victor and I have been working with startups from all across the region, in fact, all across the world, to help them enter Southeast Asia. And so we're just going to spend some time here talking a bit about everything we've learned for your benefit. And hopefully we can connect directly if you ever have any questions or want to continue the conversation after this video. Victor, how was that for an intro?
Yeah, I think that covered it also. Hey guys, I hope you're gonna find our conversation insightful. The way we're gonna run today's session is gonna be a bit of a conversation between me and Drew, where we're gonna be asking questions each other, as it relates to how to actually grow your business into Southeast Asia. So, as a first topic, we started out of Singapore. So, Drew, why don't you share, a bit of your views of why Southeast Asia and Singapore in particular are exciting markets for expansion?
Sure. So I come from Los Angeles, California. Neither of us are from Southeast Asia, as you might guess. Victor's from Europe, of course. I'm from the US. And I came here with LinkedIn back in 2012, where I was working at the time. And since then, I've been pretty active in the startup community, working with different events, speaking, investing in some startups, founding this company, of course. And it's really interesting. I've seen the startup ecosystem grow extremely quickly in Southeast Asia. To be fair, in 2012, it was pretty nascent, right? There wasn't a lot of VC money. There weren't a lot of angel investors. I think the general knowledge base for the startup ecosystem was relatively limited. But over the past several years, we've started to see an emergence of startups. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, staying on Singapore for a moment, the government's invested a lot of resources, just like your government has in South Korea, to support the startup ecosystem. That's with funding, it's with tax incentives. There's a real ambition to become a Silicon Valley of Southeast Asia here in Singapore. And I think that creates infrastructure for entrepreneurs and for investors. And we've definitely seen that. Across greater Southeast Asia, there's a couple things happening, in my opinion. Number one, there's just an immense volume of talent and people, right? Some of these countries are home to excessive amounts of people, right? Indonesia has 170 million people, if I'm not mistaken.
207.
270, excuse me. 270 million people, 17,000 islands, more or less. Yeah. And ASEAN is currently the fifth largest economy on the planet, projected to become the fourth largest by 2025. So there's a lot of buying power. Middle classes are growing. These are young markets. For example, Vietnam is an exceptionally young market. So is the Philippines. And there's an exceptional increase in digital utility, right? Now that digital utility is being utilized to serve some real problems. One of the reasons that we see ride-hailing businesses so successful here in Southeast Asia, for example, there are consumer challenges that come with mass populations that technology can streamline. So when I think about Southeast Asia, you look at the data first, which gives us a sense of the growth and the scale. Fourth largest economy in the next 4 years is impressive. The number of consumers across the region is material. I don't know it off the top of my head. Victor, you might. I know
I
you go
think
through a lot of data.
in Southeast Asia, I think it's about 600 million people.
Yeah. And for context, that's almost twice the size of the entire US population. And so there's a lot of people here. So I think these are some of the contributing factors to the scaling startup scene here in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, as you mentioned, the, the ecosystem is getting a lot more mature. We see a lot
Yeah.
of success cases now. There's a lot of unicorns that are quite successful now looking at IPOs. I think the first IPO
Yeah,
is going to be coming this year. We know Grab is talking about that and Traveloka as well. So
that's
a
right.
few really big companies that are doing fairly well and across the region and are actually big on a worldwide level, not just for Southeast Asia.
Yeah, people forget that, brands like Agoda are based here in Southeast Asia. Agoda is based in Thailand, and that's a global platform. And with those companies comes all kinds of real rich contribution towards the ecosystem. Talent comes here, investors come here, Sequoias. Here, we have some of the largest VCs now on the planet that are active in Southeast Asia. And there's no coincidence for that. I don't remember how many unicorns we have now, Victor, but I guess it's somewhere around 10 in Southeast Asia. Do you know?
Yeah, maybe a few more than that by now.
Yeah, so maybe between 10 and 20. And most recently, I was speaking with someone at Gojek who was telling me that Gojek has just become a decacorn, or is it on its way to becoming a decacorn, which is a term I'd never heard before. So there's such monstrous companies out here. Someone like Gojek in Indonesia, they obviously they employ drivers, they employ merchants, and it's in the millions, right? These are really scalable businesses that frankly can't function and scale nearly as quickly in a homogenous market like the UK or the US or Australia. There's just not nearly the same scale and not nearly the same pain points. So it's a fascinating market.
Absolutely. But unfortunately, it's not all great, right? It can be quite challenging to enter this part of the world. And that's why companies like Greenhouse exist,
Yeah,
because we acknowledge that markets like Singapore and Hong Kong that are developed, it could be relatively straightforward because everything is translated into English language and because, regulations are very easy to navigate. But then going to markets like Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, it can be quite difficult and it can cost a
yeah,
lot of money. So we've been helping a lot of startups from all over the world to come into this part of the world. So we wanted also to share some of the tips, or at least given that we have about 20 minutes for this session, just to give you an overview of what we have seen to work well, given the complexity of the region and also the opportunity. So I just want to touch on that a bit, Drew, if you don't mind. Um,
yeah. Where to begin? Okay, so I guess there's a few things that come to my mind. And Victor, I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective on this also. Depending on your business, more than likely Singapore is the right place for you to build your regional approach from, right? You can domicile here in Singapore. There's tax breaks, like I mentioned earlier. It's easier to structure your company here. It's very transparent in terms of regulatory requirements. The only challenge is going to be licensing for, fintech companies, for example. But that's true in all these markets. So I would highly suggest first considering to start with Singapore to set up a base. But beyond that, it's really about doing proper due diligence, which is, less than appealing to entrepreneurs. I think that we tend to have the tendency to jump into opportunities. Entrepreneurs by nature are very opportunistic. Excuse me. So it's easy for us to say, okay, I want to enter the Philippines or Thailand for reason ABC because I know somebody there, because we have an investor there. But the reality is, expanding your business into any market is both expensive and time consuming, right? And risky. Expensive because there are costs associated to setting up the business or driving revenue in those markets. Risky because you're going to hire people who are responsible to build that business. And we know how difficult that can be. We went through 3 country managers in the Philippines in just over 2 years. And we can talk about that in the coming moments. So I guess the first piece of advice I would offer is consider Singapore as a good starting spot. But if you're looking at other markets, and I'm sure you are, it's likely going to be associated to your industry and the opportunity in each market. Invest the proper amount of time in understanding what the complexities are, what the friction points might be in entering the market, what the opportunity is. Look at the competitive landscape, understanding what it takes to actually start a business there. If you have to physically set up an entity, or if you're able to drive revenue through a partner, for example. Victor, we help startups with that all the time. You work really closely with some of our partners, like Spark Labs in South Korea. Maybe you want to share a few thoughts on what you think it is to be successful and how to set up for success when considering a new market in Southeast Asia.
Sure. So first of all, I'd like to confirm what you're saying about Singapore. I think it's very, very common for companies to first expand to Singapore. And this is obviously because it's much easier because, you can find really good people there and because it's strategically located, but also because if you have at least 30% local shareholding, you can actually apply for a ton of different grants. Grants that are designed for startups, grants that can help you actually expand to other markets across the region, get funding, subsidize some of your employee salaries, and there's a lot of new grants that got released because of COVID, and there is a lot of grants that are just always been there and gonna be, and most probably gonna stay, right? So just from that perspective, you should be considering Singapore. We see a lot of startups
If I can say, sorry to interrupt, on the grant topic, there's one called the Market Readiness Grant, which is once you set up an entity here in Singapore, the government will cover 70% of the cost for you to employ people who are Singaporean in new markets. So if you know you want to expand across Southeast Asia, let's say you want to go into Singapore, Indonesia, and Thailand in the next year, for example, setting up in Singapore and then hiring people in Singapore who are willing to relocate and to set up a business there, or Singaporeans who are already there, you'll get 70% of the cost subsidized by the government.
Yeah. So that's I guess, the most common grant that we see companies applying for. So yeah, from grant perspective, it makes a lot of sense. We see most of our customers to actually incorporate quickly in Singapore, even if they're not planning to necessarily hire people there. That's up to you. Talent. We're gonna touch on the topic of talent, but talent in Singapore can be quite expensive. So it's not mandatory for you to build a team there, but many companies do that. And then most of the startups, because you don't necessarily need to have an office in every country. You don't need to have people on the ground. You don't need to have salespeople or developers or anyone. So what most tech companies do is that they get, and they incorporate an entity in Singapore and they coordinate from there, all the efforts across the region. And typically, all of our clients will try to test somehow the market product fit. So to what extent the market is a good fit for their solution. And there is a bunch of different services that we offer and our partners offer that actually are designed around that. Like, for example, business matching that helps you to meet strategic partners or potential customers and interview them face to face about the market and your solution and how does it click? Does it work together? So I think that has been very successful. We see a lot of companies using this kind of service, lead generation as well, or outsourcing altogether your business development on the ground so that, you can focus on what's important and not really try to understand every market because it comes with different culture, differences, language barriers and all that. So most of the SaaS companies that we help do that, they would actually outsource their BD effort. They would also consider looking for important partners such as, often, companies going to be reaching out to the cloud provider they use, such as AWS or Microsoft, and seeing how that can help them, or some other strategic partners or clients on the ground because, Southeast Asia, similar to South Korea, I guess it's a very relationship focused region. So, knowing people, it's so much more important than just getting a great solution. I have seen cases where, a foreign solution is 10 times better than the local solution, but the local people actually have the relationships. And because of that, everyone on the ground uses the local solution. So yeah, considering or using this kind of services, like outsourcing your business development, working with a network of distributors, and like also localizing as much as you can your brochures and decks, so that they feel more Southeast Asian, and so that people feel that you're actually very serious about the region and you're not just checking it out. So I think this is some of the main insights that we have seen. And given that we have just 20 minutes, we can't go too deep, but we're happy to
Yeah.
have a follow-up conversations with all of you and discuss how we can support you.
Two things I'd emphasize, because you just shared a lot, Victor, and you're right, we don't have a lot of time. The first is understanding the benefit of testing the market with an outsourced BD partner is really valuable. One of the reasons startups are initially hesitant to considering that is generally one, they're not employed by them, right? So they feel as though there's a ramp period, they have to get to know the product and the customer, and that's true, but you have to train your own staff anyways. You can do that. The second is it's expensive. It can be perceived to be expensive. Believe me, it's a lot more expensive to set up an entity, to put people in a market, and to take that risk. Whereas there's already partners that are validated and curated by partners like us that know the market, understand the landscape, and can actually help you ramp a lot faster in the market. So I'd emphasize that, and I'd emphasize the necessity to localize your language, not to the native language, but to the local nuances. Think about the customers you're selling to and how they differ in each market, because these markets are very fragmented. And the reality is consumer interests in Thailand are drastically different than those in Indonesia and drastically different than those in Malaysia.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to touch on two more topics before we wrap it up, I would like to briefly cover the topic of talent across Southeast Asia, how people should be looking at, because, it's interesting to note, but a lot of startups feel that when you expand only for the purpose of growing revenues, but a lot of companies expand for the purpose of actually outsourcing. And especially now we see that with a lot of South Korean companies because the standard of living in South Korea is quite high. So more and more companies are coming into the region to outsource. So there's, different countries have different strengths, I guess, and weaknesses. So, at least in my experience, Philippines is a good place because everyone speaks English, to outsource all kinds of support services or customer experience kind of work. We've seen a lot of companies doing that. Whereas, Vietnam is emerging as a tech hub, and, more and more companies are looking more towards Vietnam rather than India. At least that's, something we have seen. Drew, have you seen any other interesting trends across the region?
Yeah. There's a lot, right? I think you're spot on about the Philippines. Very fluent in the English language, lots of service businesses there, back office businesses there. Obviously, that's a good industry. In terms of Vietnam, one of the reasons that I think Vietnam has become kind of a hotbed for tech talent is the Chinese influence. There's just a real young emergence of and a hungry core group of young developers. And a lot of companies that are going into Vietnam and building businesses because of that. The language barrier can be difficult, but I think that generally speaking, you're going to find faster, sharper developers in Vietnam in general than you find in India. I think that's generally true. In markets like Indonesia, there's a lot of tech talent, but relative to market size, there's a scarcity issue. So what happens in a market like Indonesia is there's so much work and there's so many big companies that are scaling now that they're all hiring the best developers as quickly as possible. And so a lot of young developers are being overcompensated and being moved into roles a bit outside of their reach simply because of the demand in the market. So for that reason, I would stay away from Indonesia. But Indonesia is great for consumer tech, right? It's great for consumer products and e-commerce, for example. I think that's probably true for both Indonesia and Thailand. They're both similar in that regard. And interestingly enough, logistics and supply chain based technology businesses seem to be scaling in Vietnam as well. It seems to be a bit of an epicenter. And lastly, Victor, I'll just mention agritech for a moment. I think agritech and edtech, we're starting to see a lot of movement there across many markets in Southeast Asia, specifically Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia. There's a real interesting movement in that direction. There's not too much deep tech here. You and I were talking about that just before this call. I don't think that's a real specified segment. And I just don't think that Southeast Asia is really tapping into that yet aggressively. Same is true for medtech. We do see some medtech across the region, but I don't think it's a strength. I think the biggest strengths are really going to be around e-commerce, consumer-based products, and consumer tech. That's not to say that other segments aren't emerging. It's just to say that those are some of the biggest and most emerging categories here in Southeast Asia. What do you think, Victor?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been helping a lot of biotech companies from Korea, and most of them would try, Singapore, experiment a little bit with outsourcing or distribution in other markets, but I think Singapore is the best positioned market for that, or Hong Kong.
Yeah.
But it's kind of challenging, to go to other parts of it. Of course, it depends what kind of solution you have. We have also seen solutions that are specifically designed around COVID to work well because, the region just struggles to deal with COVID. Some markets are better than other. But, just such a big population and it's a big problem that we are all facing at the same time. So I think that has been successful, but in general, I don't think deep tech, actually clicks well with the region. So because of that, just have it in mind, perhaps for outsourcing purposes, so for different reasons rather than growing revenues.
You're right on biotech though. Biotech, Singapore has a home for biotech because from Singapore, there are a lot of mature investors that understand biotech. Same is true for edtech actually in Singapore. And you get easier access to really big markets like India and North America, for example, from Singapore than you would otherwise. How are we doing on time, Victor?
I think we have another 5 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So why don't we cover the last topic for today, which is, fundraising in Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
Because a lot of companies, as they come into the region, they understand the importance of having strategic partners and, getting a local investor on the ground that has a good network is one of the first things that they start asking for. So Drew, you're quite experienced, fundraising and you have decent network of VCs. So what are your observations of, what are the best practices as it comes to fundraising in Southeast Asia? And just some tips that, everyone that watches today's video can appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a lot to talk about on this issue. I would say the first thing I would mention is that cultivating relationships with VCs is a long-term investment. I don't think the mentality of, I need to raise money in January next year, so I'll go to market in January next year is the right approach. I would very strongly suggest you start reaching out to the right people today, so they can get to know you and get to know your business a bit. And the reason for that is a lot of VCs out here, whether they're early stage or more, later stage in nature, they want to see more traction today than they had in the past. I think they want to take less risks today than they have in the past. COVID is probably a contributor to that. So unless you have exceptional traction that really showcases you have the ability to take capital, invest it into your operations, and scale the business pretty simply, you're going to have to fight for your fundraise. So as it relates to the VC ecosystem, the first thing I would say is invest some time in getting to know the landscape a bit and building relationships there. But there are also angel investors all over Southeast Asia. A lot of them are very traditional in nature, and they're used to investing in, real estate, for example. But many of them really have an appetite to get into startup and tech ecosystems. The same is true for family offices. We're starting to see an emergence right now of family offices that actually want to make earlier stage investments in startups because they missed the boat on all the big brands that these VCs have gobbled up. So I guess I would suggest consider family offices, consider angels. And if you need to get to angels, there's a lot of options for that, right? There are angel syndicate platforms like Central Angels here in Singapore, Angel Hub in Hong Kong, and there's a whole host of them across the region. And you can also contract people as venture partners. So if you're building your network a bit, you might find some people who are really well connected in the startup ecosystem in the markets that appeal to you. And you can contract them to 2, 3, 4, or even 5% of your fundraise if they go out and help you bring opportunities into the cap table. It's very common. It's just called the venture partnership. And you can structure a very simple agreement with that. We can even share with you a template of our own, for example. That's how I would look at the fundraising landscape in Southeast Asia. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and just to add on this, another thing people ask us very often is what kind of grants exist in countries like Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. There is no grants.
Singapore is the only one. Yeah.
Don't waste your time on that.
Sadly.
You can find, as Drew said, you can find business angels, you can find family offices, but You there's no grants that are designed for you unless you're Amazon. If you're Amazon and you wanna
Yeah.
expand to Indonesia, they're gonna give you land, tax breaks, stuff like that. But that works
Right.
only for really big companies. Otherwise, it's gonna be hard.
That's right.
Yeah, but I think we managed to cover quite a few topics. And of course, there's a lot more to say, but we were given just a bit of time for this presentation. So feel free to reach out. We're going to be actually giving some vouchers for different startups where you can approach us with go-to-market sessions where we're going to be sitting down and spending more time to understand your model and sharing more about what works, given what we know about you and what we have seen in the region. So just reach out to the Spark Labs team, and I'm sure they're gonna brief you how to get in touch with us. But thank you very much, Drew, and thank you very much everyone for watching today's video.
Thank you for your time. Thanks, everybody. Take care.